Hi, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Gretchen Bergman, co-founder and executive director of A New Path, which stands for Parents for Addiction Treatment and Healing, and the lead organizer of our national, actually international, Moms United to End the War on Drugs campaign. Today's interview is a continuing conversation about our current campaign, Too Many Moms Mourning, to address really the triple crisis of COVID-19, overdose, and the systemic racism of our criminal justice system. And joining me today are two amazing women who are part of our Moms United collaborative campaign. Colleen Cowles is the author of War on Us. She's a mother with direct experience about drug war damage, and she's an attorney, and she's written a beautifully comprehensive, well-researched book. And Rosaline Preudhomme, one of the key organizers of the Institute of Black World 21st Century. She's been a leader of drug policy reform for 50 years and can speak about how the war on drugs really targets and harms, in particular, the Black community. So we are representing California here, Wisconsin with Colleen, and New York with Roz, if it's okay with you that I call you Roz.
Yes.
I understand some people call you Mama Roz.
That's because of my years.
Well, I'm there too. So I'd like to start by asking each of you just to tell me a little bit about you, about the work that you do, what made you come into this drug policy reform world advocacy. I know for me, it was because of my experience with my two sons who struggled with addiction to heroin for decades. That was problematic enough, but when you add the criminal justice system really exacerbating the problem, putting my older son behind bars in and out for 11 years of his young life, and all the complications that are heaped on when a criminal justice system gets involved. So that's what started my work 21 years ago when we started A New Path, really to address the stigmatism, but also the criminalization caused by the war on drugs, which is a war on our families. And Colleen writes about that so beautifully. It's a war on us. So Colleen, I'll start with you. If you'd give us a few moments of how you started and what you're doing.
Thanks, Gretchen. Well, like you, I came to this when our sons were impacted, and there is no doubt at all at this point in my life, I can with authority say the war on drugs is much worse than addiction itself, and addiction is no picnic, we all know. But the devastation that's created by the war on drugs is pretty unbelievable to many who haven't been directly involved. So when I had direct involvement, but then also was working with clients really in estate planning and business transition areas, not criminal defense, but I was finding that more and more families were being taken down emotionally, financially, and really in every way by what was happening to them. I think that maybe if there is a positive in what we're all going through right now, I think maybe all of us have gotten a little bit of a taste recently about what confinement and lack of control of the future really is about. But when you think about someone many times who is caught with a pill in their pocket or an amount of powder that's the size of a dime in your hand, and oftentimes that's because they're self-medicating either physical or emotional medical issues for which they couldn't find traditional help. Because they're arrested for that, they are risking confinement, not only in prison or in jail, but messing with every aspect of their lives. The fear of potential incarceration, the scarlet F on their forehead for a felony that can last for a lifetime and compromise just being able to rent a place to live or to get a job for very minor things. And then when I started realizing that we have medical solutions, including medications, that are not only not used by the criminal justice system, but they're prohibited, There is no logic, there is no science, there is no medicine behind our drug policy. So I felt the need, the more I realized that we weren't the only family impacted, I really felt the need to let people know, because I think all of us have a lot to worry about. And unless it hits us, it doesn't oftentimes come to our list. And there's definitely a racial component to this, and we can talk about that as we move forward here. But regardless of whether you're a family of color or not, I would implore you to put it to the top of your list before it lands on your doorstep, because it will. It's just a matter of time, and it will reach your family, and it's reaching all of us, and basically destroying the fabric of our society. You know, we can change out every police officer out there, but if we don't change the policies that are directing those officers and that are compromising civil rights for everyone, we've got problems. It's time for change.
Love it. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And Roz, please introduce yourself and the wonderful work you do and what drives you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, Gretchen, I want to thank you for your unselfish and passionate work in this space. I tell you, your testimony is your test has been your testimony, and you certainly have been tested. And I certainly want to thank Colleen. Prior to going live, I was sharing with Colleen that I really, really am taking a lot of information from her book, especially the stats and her stories as well, and using them as I continue to do this work. What brought me to this work is over 400 years of seeing the enslavement of people of African ancestry like myself. I came to this country right around the year of my 16th birth from the country of Barbados in the Caribbean. And back in 1961, that was really at the height or in the middle of the struggle for desegregation and to gain our civil rights and to have persons of African ancestry continue to struggle to retain their dignity and their space. So I started to be very, very curious as to the disproportionality that I was witnessing in the United States, coming from the Caribbean in a country where 95% of us look like each other as Africans. And so I knew my school teachers and I knew, those that I would go to the store, and everybody looked like me. And we were almost like a very close-knit community. So I was very, very curious with the policies and was somewhat pleased to see that President Lyndon Baines Johnson, as a result of the protests, and I really call them testaments, what I would call them direct action. People say protest, and I say it's taking direct action so we can change policy. So when I saw some of the policies being shifted, gaining voting rights and, some of the things that Richard Nixon, who followed him as president, was starting to implement. And then slowly but surely, I kept hearing that the United States policy under Nixon is going to declare war on drugs. And I kept saying, well, wait a minute, if a war is being declared, what's the reason? So you start researching and figuring out that the reason was, quote unquote, to protect communities and to keep them safe. So it was under the guise of a whole law and order concept. But then if you have war, who are the victims of the war? Who are the enemies? Using just the terminology war, declaring war, then you have to go into combat. How are you going to go into combat? Who are going to be the casualties? How are you going to remedy? How are you going to treat those who've been affected by the war? So I got knee deep into this whole notion of who has declared war and for what reason, and who are the enemies of this declaration and who are going to be the casualties. And I must say that it didn't take me long to figure out that the gains of the civil rights, effort and direct action to change policy were under siege, and that the government in the United States had to figure out a way to really target, because folk were beginning to say, well, with all of these newfound freedoms, we're not safe. So I mentioned to anyone who is within my listening ear at any time that I talk about drug policy, that the war on drugs really was orchestrated as a war on the Black community and a war on my race. Can't hear you, Gretchen.
Oh, Gretchen, your audio's out.
Yes, your audio's out, Gretchen.
Well, Gretchen gets that audio back. I'd like to read a quote from the Nixon administration to pick up on what you were talking about, Rosaline. This is a quote from Ehrlichman, who was counsel and assistant to President Nixon. So here's what he said about the beginnings of the declared war on drugs. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about drugs? Of course we did. But
exactly.
My point on a lot of that is it wouldn't have been able to continue if the general public didn't somehow think that this was noble. Because I think if people really understood the background of the war on drugs and the decimation of the Black community, but also everyone, we've got 1 in 3 Americans now having a criminal record. So when I started doing the research for the book, the statistics just really astounded me. We have more Blacks in state and federal prisons right now than were slaves in 1850 before the Civil War. So it's just amazing to me. A lot of people, I think that that the war on drugs has been going on for a long time, and if we make changes, somehow we're risking increased addiction and overdose rates, which is exactly the opposite. This war has escalated those rates, wasted taxpayer money, and wiped out civil rights.
Exactly, Colleen. And I don't know if Gretchen's audio is back, but let me just piggyback on what you've outlined. It's very, very simple. When you look at the term war, when I break that down, I then say, well, who's the enemy and what are the casualties? And how do we know when the war is won? How do we know when to withdraw, quote unquote, our troops? How do we know when to pull back? And I'm saying that to do that, you had to figure out a way to criminalize drugs. So drugs no longer became a public issue, a public health issue. Drugs became a criminal law enforcement in lock them up. And the other casualties, and when you ask what happens as a result of these people who've been victimized by the war, is, Colleen, beyond institutionalization in terms of incarceration. You got to look at, first of all, how did they get incarcerated as a result of this quote unquote war on drugs, the disproportionality of the disparities between the sentences. We all know what happened, with the crack cocaine difference. We look at the statistics in terms of the number of young Black men in particular, and now it's rising young Black women who are in institutions. And we often wonder, well, what happens when they come out of these institutions? Well, housing has now been criminalized. Education has now been criminalized. Child welfare has now been criminalized. And employment, you can't get it. So I could go on and on and on, from policies such as, fighting to ban the box, and fighting for mothers to not lose their parental rights and the child welfare as a result of incarceration, people who are coming back to the communities but cannot go back to live in state-supported housing because of their quote-unquote criminal record. On and on it goes. So there's still casualties. And when you fast forward it to what's happening now in terms of the protests and the days of direct action to change public policy, with the whole movement as a result of the ongoing unconscionable killings, those who they can't kill, they just lock up or they just try to harass. That's what is happening right now on all of the streets in America.
I hear sometimes that, yes, that was, the George Floyd situation was horrendous, but there aren't that many. And I think everyone needs to understand that one would be too many. But the anger is about a lot more than just police killing. It's destroying the lives. I mean, I've sat in those courtrooms with defendants, and these may be people who don't even go to jail or prison, but they're repeatedly sitting in either probation offices or in courtrooms. I've never seen the level of disrespect that I see in those situations where they're sitting there worrying about whether they're going to lose the job that maybe they were fortunate enough to get when they have a criminal record. And they're never told, how long is it going to take? Why am I here? Half the time people don't, not half, but often people don't show up and they're rescheduled. When life is completely out of control for an individual, for an incident that didn't have a victim, and it's ongoing for years, it builds enormous resentment and anger for good reason. And I don't think that unless someone is sitting in those courtrooms and understanding on the level of what being on probation does to someone, having to ask for permission for anything they do. Most probation requirements make them sign off on the confidentiality of their medical records. So if they go to a counselor to help with an addiction issue, that can be reported back to their probation officer. There's so many levels of this that are so wrong and that the public doesn't understand, that creates the level of anger that we're seeing at this point, that unfortunately is erupting in some ways that then create this black and white line. But there needs to be some understanding of the number of years and the amount of anger that has been building for so many years, and all of the things that need to be changed.
Can we hear you, Gretchen?
Gretchen,
no.
audio.
Gretchen's audience. So we'll keep chatting, Colleen.
Well, one
because
thing we could talk about.
I just wanted to say, when you say so many years, it's 400, and plus years for our race. But let me go back to something that I think that Gretchen will want to post and let her listeners know. A few years ago, I got familiar with a program called Participatory Defense. And I first learned about it through the National Council, led by a powerful sister, Andrea James, called the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women. And if you really Google participatory defense, it's really a front line once a member of your family gets involved with law enforcement. There is a whole trained group of persons within the community who volunteer to work with the caregivers, the people who are connected with this person who is confronted with law enforcement, to kind of like walk them through what to expect from the arraignment all the way up to, like you said, when they get to probation, literally, if they're sentenced and then eventually serve and get out. So I would encourage people to take a look at that program, Participatory Defense. And I know the National Council offers this in several cities. So that may be something that would be of interest.
Well, and
Gretchen, are you back?
I think it's
No.
no, still not hearing you, Gretchen. I think another thing that's important for parents to understand, so often as parents, we're told if your child has a substance use issue or ends up with, as part of the criminal justice system, kick them to the curb, let them hit bottom. Parents need to understand that this is a very dysfunctional system, that advocating for your child is not a bad thing. And that otherwise we're leaving our children defenseless against a system that will destroy them, and the bottom very well may be death. There is absolutely nothing wrong with, and I would ask parents to really look at what's happening, look behind the curtain, and be there to advocate for your child. We also have things like drug courts that have been promoted as solutions, and in some cases, maybe we're better off with drug courts than having people go directly to jail. But I would really, I'd like to promote true answers, and the participatory defense that you talked about, Rosaline, is one of them. Harm reduction methods so that we can keep our kids alive long enough for them to find recovery.
Exactly. Not only
looking at legalization of drugs, and
that's right.
Treating,
but I would say, Colleen, not only to keep our kids, alive, but going back to my metaphor and my use and trying to understand the it was intentional, the terminology war. Because in war, once you have victims of war, what happened to the survivors? Those who are in communities now trying to just survive. The community, the Black community, has been harmed, egregiously harmed, across all spectrums of systems. Whether you look at the justice system, the educational system, the housing, you pick one, we've been harmed. So then the question becomes, how do you remedy the harm? How do you go back to those communities and try to restore a sense of dignity, a sense of hope? How do you go about healing? And that's how I met Gretchen. I am working with an organization called the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. And one of the programs they have is a group of Black professional organizations who partner and collaborate in what we call the Black Family Summit. And we were able to get a grant from Open Societies Foundation to bring those groups together annually. And then the Drug Policy Alliance was able to help buttress that grant so that we can bring them together and try to figure out, okay, this war continues. This war has devastated and decimated our communities. Now, how do we go about to look for policies that can help repair, to look for programs that can support the repair of the harm?
Absolutely. I'm going to test one more time. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. We can hear you now, Gretchen.
I had to leave and come back, but I've been listening to you, and you're fabulous. I mean, who needed me? I want to go back to something that you said, Roz, earlier about we are the casualties of the war on drugs, right?
Yes.
And that's one of our Ask Mom about the casualties of the drug war. My son was born in 1971, the same year that Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs. I mean, and that's at that time, this was my first piece of advocacy. Well, is this your child's future? I mean, I had no idea at that time what this drug war, the kind of damage that it would create over decades, almost 5 decades, right? And so it seems to me, and I think you've been addressing this, I'm sorry because I went in and out a little bit, but how this is such an important time right now. I mean, it's so bad. and with this triple threat, that there is an opportunity, if you will, but an absolute responsibility right now to do something about it and to speak out. And we see the moms in Portland, Oregon, arm in arm to protect their families, and I think across the nation and across the world, really. It's because it's a global issue, but more.
I think it's really important too to point out that this has been a bipartisan failure throughout the years. I mean, we have had so much on. I mean, there's been hope with different administrations, but we truly have not seen any significant change. And this has continued throughout administrations, regardless of party. So both parties have failed. And in order to really bring change, we've got to bring everyone together to make everyone in both parties and everyone in between understand that this is impacting everyone and that it is possible to really make change. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, two of you were in Portugal. I mean, we know that there are successes that have been long-term successes. And once those successes have been implemented, both parties have supported the successes. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at what has worked in other places and build on that. And I think we can do that in a bipartisan way, the same way that the failures have been bipartisan.
But Colleen, I would say to build on that, one has to really come to a reckoning. A day, and I'm not talking about a kumbaya moment where we all come together and everything is going to be wonderful. But until you really, really come to understand that you want to eradicate and reduce institutional racism across all platforms, then everything else that you try to come up with, you're never going to view drugs within a health prism. You're just not going to do it. Because if race clouds that vision and that policy, then you're going to try to figure out, well, why should certain groups, be given an opportunity, and why should we as taxpayers pay money for people to go and get help, because it's a health issue? It's not a health issue, it's a choice issue. So those kinds of messages. So I try to stay in this work. I'm at the end of this month, well, not the end of this month, the end of August 31st, I'll be 75 years. I've been out here a long, long time. And I while I'm no ways yet tired, because every time I think I want to sit down, I have to stand up again because I have to add my voice and let it be heard, and until all of the voices are heard and until all of us try to stand up and understand. But for me, my battle with the war is that we'll continue to be waging a war as long as we continue to view it within the prisms of injustice as a result of institutional racism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that my point, I think, Rosaline, was that I'm looking for ways of being able to really convey to people specific policies that we want changed. Because if we don't convey specific policies, there's more frustration, but we don't see the movement. So, and that's the attorney in me speaking here. But I want to see specifics. I want to see bills. I want to see change. And there's really two components. It's let's stop the damage, and then let's look at what the damage has done in the past and what do we do about that. But we've got to stop the damage. We've got to do both at the same time, because every day people are literally dying and lives are being destroyed. But we've got to stop the damage going forward, or we've got this circular situation where we're trying to do something on one side, but if we don't end the war on drugs, it's going to continue. And you're right. There is certainly a component in that. I mean, you look at the numbers, there is no way that anyone can argue that this isn't based on a racist system. As this war has expanded, hopefully the devastation that's now starting to also impact other races, maybe that will bring more people into the fold and help to get an understanding of what's been going on and what's been decimating the Black community for so many years and now is entering into other races. Because if we can bring people together and have specific demands, our chances of making change will be greater.
So we've come to the end of our time, but you guys are such well, as I said, amazing women. But I'm finding myself, despite the technical challenges, feeling really hopeful and at peace, because I believe that together we can make this change. And it makes me have the sense that I'm not the only one shoving the boulder up the hill, that we're all shoving the boulder up the hill together,
Yes.
right? So please join us. We have a Moms United a Facebook page. We have a New Path Facebook page. We right now are in the middle of this campaign, Too Many Moms Mourning. And they're mourning for so many different reasons, but the drug war devastation ripples through so many issues, where this is an awareness, you can get it on our website, momsunited.net. I love you ladies. You fill me with hope and peace, and I admire you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you so much
for the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love your advocacy spirit, Colleen. Keep it up.
Great time.
Okay.
Okay. Bye, ladies. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Advocates, mama, warriors.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.